Hey, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Hope your summer has been going well. Crazy to think that we are already back at it and that it is now the end of August. For me, this is my final year, hopefully, my final year of seminary, and looking forward to this journey with you. It's been a great summer. My family and I are still trying to find a groove with our kiddos. We have a 6-year-old daughter. And also, we just welcomed back in May our little boy Braden, and he is now, believe it or not, 3 months old. For those of you that don't know, but I'm confident that many of you do, my name is Mike Voit. Full name Michael Voit. I typically only get Michael if my wife is upset with me or really wants to get my attention, or if it kind of gets to another level, it's Michael Joseph, so first and middle name, but I typically go by Mike, so call me Mike. I joined this cohort back in the fall of 2016, and it's been great to join up with you guys and engage in all the classwork that we've been engaging in and getting into all sorts of discussion and whatnot. And so I'm looking forward to the journey we're going to take this year. A little bit about my family and where we live. My family and I live in a town called Ellington. Ellington is kind of a semi-rural, semi-suburban town in Connecticut, in the state of Connecticut. We are about 10 miles south of Massachusetts. We are about 2 hours west of Boston, and so we are kind of in the heart of New England, and so I have to put up with a lot of New England Patriots fans, and that is always a good time. Like I said, this is somewhat of a semi-rural community. There's lots of farming, and yet at the same time, we are close to civilization. It's only right down the road that we have to travel. So semi-rural, semi-suburban. I've been serving as the lead pastor of my church for a little over a year now. The name of the church is Ellington Wesleyan Church. I started last July. We absolutely love it here. My family loves it here. The church is awesome. The church is growing. The schools are awesome. It's just been a very wonderful place for my family and I to settle, and we do see ourselves here for the long haul, and so it's just been a great place for our family. Quite honestly, I've never been a part of a church with so much enthusiasm and excitement and growth, and I don't just say that to puff myself up or to make others feel bad about their context or just exaggerate. I say that because it's just been crazy and it's been overwhelming with what God has been doing here. My specific ministry context, like I said earlier, Ellington is very much a growing community. From what I have witnessed, this community is full of young families that have definitely been the bulk of our growth here at the church for the past year. What I'm also finding out is that people who grew up in Ellington, when they grow up in Ellington, they oftentimes go off. They go off to school, and then they go off to another place and find a job, and they get married, and maybe they start having kids. What I'm finding is that they end up moving back to Ellington because they love this community so much. And it's such a family-friendly community, and the schools are awesome that I totally understand why they move back. This community is largely Caucasian, but even though it's largely Caucasian, various ethnicities are represented in and around this community. I think the second largest ethnicity would be those of Indian descent, and that grouping would be followed by African American brothers and sisters, but once again, largely Caucasian and many, many young families. As far as the church is concerned, this church, I'm still learning the history. It has an interesting history. It was founded in 1967. It was a thriving church in the 70s and the 80s and 90s. When I say thriving, I'm not necessarily talking about, over 500 people. I would say there are probably maybe 150, 200 people. Yet around 2008 or 2009, I believe the church went without a pastor for about 8 months, and there was just crazy decline. And before that 8-month drought, I think there was another pastor that just didn't jive well with the church, and so attendance just plummeted. Between those two occurrences, it plummeted to about 10 or 12 people. In 2013, there was a pastoral couple that came here, young family, and they served as co-pastors, and they really did a phenomenal job of bringing this church back and helping it regain life and doing all sorts of building work and renovation. When I took over in May of 2016, I'd say there was an average of 65, 70 total people here at the church. As of right now, we are probably at 100, 110. And like I said, this has just been an incredible thing to be a part of. And I've never been a part of something like this before. I mean, this church is just growing, and more people just continue to cross our path and stick with us. Our church is largely white. We have several African Americans, as well as a family from the Caribbean, but we are largely Caucasian. And if I were to put a percentage on the different age groups represented in our church, I would say that 70% of our church is young families. So we're talking young families with 2 or 3 kids. 25% of our congregation would probably be older individuals, older couples. When I say older, I mean over 65 years old. And then I would say 5% of our church is made up of young adults. This is going to be an interesting class to participate in as we talk about congregational spiritual formation. Our church, it's interesting how my context will intersect wonderfully with this class, because my church is in a place where we were almost like a church restart, if you will. And so we're about, 4 years into that restart. I mean, if you talk about going down to 8 or 10 people, you're basically in a restart. And so as we've been growing, I have been sensing, and my deepest heart's desire is to take people deeper into the things of God. And discipleship is huge on my heart. And the thought of taking people deeper is exciting, and yet it is also a challenge. It's a challenge to move people beyond just the Sunday morning experience, so they can experience deeper community and deeper spiritual growth. But before we could dive into that for a while, but at the same time, I just want to share with you my spiritual formation story, just real quick, because I could spend a lot of time on this, but I don't want to do that. My story of coming to faith. My mother grew up Roman Catholic, and after I was born, she wanted a different context for me, church context. And so from as early as I can remember, she started taking me to a Pentecostal church that was about 20 minutes from where we lived, outside of Buffalo, New York. I went to that Pentecostal church till I was maybe 11 or 12 years old. Let's just say I just kind of witnessed some things that I had lots of questions about. I wouldn't say I didn't believe some of the things that happened, just as a young man experiencing those worship services that were highly charismatic. Just had lots of questions, and even had lots and lots of questions for my Sunday school teachers. And oftentimes, those questions didn't necessarily get answered. And I don't know if I was looking for answers, or if I was just looking for someone to come alongside me and say, hey, we've asked those questions too, and this is how we wrestled through it. But anyway, that was my church experience. My mother was heavily involved, and as the more she got involved with that church, the more I got involved with that church. It got to the level of involvement where she was signing me up for plays and musicals. And my last musical, I was casted as Satan. And so that does something to you. I'm just kidding. But it was a decent experience at that church. Nevertheless, when I was headed into high school, that summer between 8th grade and my 9th grade year, I found out that my parents were going to be splitting. And it was very tragic, and it was very sudden, and there was all sorts of doubt and betrayal that came with that. And so I said, hey, if the church couldn't come alongside me, couldn't answer those questions I had earlier, then how in the world are they going to answer this one now and help me through this? And so I walked away for a long time. And my high school years, I was a mess. And as I was just talking to somebody this morning in my congregation, even though I walked away, I still had this sense of God and thought of God and reflected on God, even in those crazy high school years. But I never really took a step to get back involved. Then came early college years, and I was studying to be a teacher at Buffalo State College. I was about 3 years into my teaching degree, and things were just kind of bottoming out, and I was engaged in a lot of destructive, unhealthy behaviors and habits. And I ended up meeting the assistant pastor at my grandmother's church, and I'm not really sure how we got connected and how in the world we developed this friendship. Truly an act of God. And what I found out as I became friends with him over the first 2 weeks, and we talked and we texted, is that he was just as genuine as they come. There was nothing that he was going to pull out of his sleeve. There was no agenda, and I knew that, and I was very comfortable with him. And so we talked a lot. And I would say about a month into our friendship, the way I just seen him living his life, the healthy relationship he had with his fiance, I just said, I have never seen someone with so much joy and so much hope and so much purpose. And that was something I was very thirsty for at the time. And so Kevin and I, one day, we prayed together, and I recommitted my life to the faith, and I began helping him out with the youth ministry. And then I started just sensing this call to ministry, like I could do this. I could do this forever. I could do this every day. This is what I could wake up for, and this is what I could do. I would say some of the biggest contexts of spiritual formation for me have been those one-on-one settings. It started with Kevin, and then when I went off and started ministry in Michigan, I would meet with this pastor in my district, one of the most genuine, authentic guys I know. His name is Dennis Cook, and we would meet probably once a month or once every 2 weeks at Panera Bread. And man, he walked me through some very interesting, sometimes difficult times in those early stages of ministry and life, in my early stages of marriage. And he's just been a profound influence in my life, Dennis, as well as my friend Kevin. I still talk to Kevin all the time. And so that one-on-one mentoring context was really huge. When I went off to Houghton College, like I said, I was studying to be a teacher at Buff State. When I recommitted my life to Christ and started feeling called to ministry, I transferred schools, and I started attending Houghton College. People thought I was crazy because I was almost done and I was ready to graduate from Buff State in just a year, but I sensed that this was the right move, and I met my wife there. But even more, that was essentially like my discipleship context. And so when I went there, it was a deeply shaping experience, not just academically, but personally, like the whole being, the soul. And so, and so I would say Houghton was also a huge part of my journey. And one-on-one mentoring took place there with some of my professors and even small group experiences. But now I'm the pastor of a church, and I would say, my spiritual formation is at the individual level, and yet at the same time, it is also in that large group context, but also in the small group context. And so I hope that kind of gives you insight into the way I have been shaped and formed. Once again, look forward to diving into this class with you. And I hope you all have an awesome week as we kind of get going on all these assignments. Grace and peace.